we're going to begin the meeting by standing and reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of the Citizens Communication Council. We do have a quorum this evening, although we do not anticipate ruling or making any rulings on any particular item on the agenda. We do have a published agenda that we will follow. Without further ado, I'll begin with that agenda. The first item on the agenda is the Wireless Facilities Ordinance. This was an ordinance that was reviewed last year by the council, and we provided input to the Planning Commission and commissioners as far as substantive changes to, some substantive changes and language changes to the ordinance itself, proposed ordinance, as well as comment with respect to the council's possible role going forward in connection with reviewing and providing input on applications for wireless facilities of various types, both tower-based, non-tower-based, and small-sized wireless facility, carrier equipment. So the ordinance itself was in fact passed by the commissioners back in March of 2022, and the final version that was passed did in fact incorporate some of the language changes that were recommended by the council. Specifically, the ordinance does provide a role for the council with respect to reviewing applications for any type of wireless facility that's applied for, permission is applied for. That role is not very clearly defined, but it's my understanding at this point that it basically, based on the ordinance language, the zoning officer would refer any applications to the Citizens Communication Council for review and input. But the sort of details of how that would work are yet to be determined as far as I understand. My understanding further is that Township Council is still reviewing, or Township, Legal Council, excuse me, let's make that clear, Legal Council is still reviewing our suggestions or, input on the role of the Citizens Communication Council in this process, and intend to get back to us with respect to their thoughts on what we've had to say there. So there is a role for the Citizens Communication Council going forward with respect to the Wireless Facilities Ordinance and the application process. And so that's something that we want to take into account and consider in one of the later agenda items, which is a review and discussion of the council's purpose and role. I don't know if anybody has any comment or questions they want to add to that agenda item. No? Okay.
So just one comment on that. Can we take from, so this is a question, we have to plan out how the process is going to work with the Board of Commissioners. The Board of Commissioners had us report to the Planning Commission, and then the Planning Commission put everything together. So that was one process. That was one way of managing things. But then I guess we'll wait to hear from the Board of Commissioners if that's a process that they want to continue to use or something else. So that's just a question.
I think you're correct. I mean, that was the process that we went through last year when we were involved in the review of the ordinance. I don't know the specifics yet, but my understanding is that council is reviewing the process, and at some point, I guess, between the Board of Commissioners and the Planning Commission and ourselves, we'll we'll arrive at sort of the destination in terms of what exactly our role is and what we're expected to do and what type of input we're expected to provide. So, but I think the sort of the takeaway here is that there is a role. There was some concern, I think, by some council members that we had done that review and provided that input, and it went nowhere, and we heard nothing, which the latter part is actually true. I didn't realize until this morning when I went looking for the ordinance that, in fact, it had been passed and that some of our recommendations have been incorporated. But we still don't know specifically what that role is, but there is a role contemplated for the council. So I think that's how I'd answer that. Second item on the agenda is the status of the Verizon franchise agreement. And again, this is an agreement that I'm not sure if negotiations are actively underway, but the Cohen firm is again involved in negotiating, renegotiating the franchise agreement with Verizon. And we have been asked to review the existing franchise agreement with Comcast that was renegotiated back in 2017 for purposes of, I guess, sort of seeing how various issues played out in that particular agreement for purposes of referencing them in negotiations going forward with Verizon. I had hoped that Art Hartel would be here this evening to be involved in this portion of the agenda because Art was personally involved and has a lot of direct knowledge of how the Comcast negotiations proceeded and what occurred there, which I think would be very helpful from the standpoint of, strategizing and figuring out the approach to negotiations of the Verizon agreement. But once again, we're kind of a little bit in the dark because we don't know what our specific role is, but my understanding is council for the township would like us to review the Comcast agreement in preparation for further discussions with respect to the negotiation of the Verizon agreement. So I would suggest that we do so in the interim before the next meeting and that we have a more substantive discussion on the Verizon franchise agreement and the approach going forward there at the October meeting. I don't know if anybody has any comment or question with respect to that particular agenda item.
Brian, I think that the Communications Council should have a clear understanding of what is expected of us as to what role we play in the negotiations. I mean, we're an intricate part of the township, and I think that we should, if we're going to make a contribution, we should know what's expected of us.
I agree, John. I think that's a very good point, and I think that's one of the one of the reasons that this council has, kind of for a period of time sort of lost its way, because at one point in time, this council was very much involved in the negotiation of these types of agreements, and a few years back, that changed when outside counsel was brought in and took more of an active role in that, and so the council, frankly, sort of foundered for a period of time. Wasn't really sure what the role or purpose was, and as a result, wasn't very effective. So I fully agree with you. I think that's a good point. We need to determine to the fullest extent possible what our role is with respect to these negotiations and what the expectations are in terms of our review of the Comcast franchise agreement and the nature and type of input that is desired from us. And as I say, my recommendation would be that we review the Comcast agreement and plan at the next meeting in October to have a more substantive discussion on this issue, and hopefully, perhaps we can get somebody from the Cohen firm to appear, and we can get a better idea of what the expectation is that way. But at the very least, I would hope that Art Hartel could attend so that we could get more perspective on the approach to the negotiations of that particular agreement and how that might impact our thoughts and approach with respect to Verizon. All right, moving on to the third agenda item is, in fact, involves the Comcast franchise agreement and specifically a process for determining the 5G recipient. And Ian has agreed, MSI has agreed to sort of present that particular issue. So Ian, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I wanted to have it before us as the Citizens Communication Council and before the public that in the Comcast franchise agreement, there is a 5G channel. There's one, and we have three potential recipients: Mainline TV 21, RTSD TV, which is the educational channel. The first is the public channel. RTSD TV is the educational channel, or Radnor TV, which is the government channel. So those are the three PEG channels. And so we had never before talked about what kind of process should be in place for determining who gets to have that 5G channel. What criteria would you have? And that sort of thing. So I just wanted to have it before us so that those criteria could begin to be determined. Probably the Board of Commissioners would determine some of it, but also probably they would look to us as the Citizens Communication Council for listing out potential criteria. So I wanted to have that as an agenda item, so that's in front of us.
Could you just go over what the 5G channel is?
I think we're all 4G right now, and so there's only one 5G available or one additional 5G channel available. I'm going back in my memory to talking to Vince Celli, the late Vince Celli at Mainline TV. So yes, clarification even on that would be needed too, which maybe will happen when we review the Comcast agreement, which I guess we need to have a copy of that from Molly Gallagher so that we can review that for October. So I guess as we're reviewing that, we can work on agenda item number 3 in terms of what we want to recommend. Do the Board of Commissioners want us to recommend criteria, that kind of thing?
So it would be your anticipation that the council will take an advisory role with respect to the criteria to be considered by the commissioners in awarding that 5G channel.
Yep, I always see our role as a board or commission in the advisory capacity. But just with all of the work that the commissioners do on a regular basis, I don't think they should have to try to figure out some of these technical things that we have expertise here, experience here on the Citizens Communication Council, and it helps the Board of Commissioners, I think, to avail of us to, for example, make those criteria, draft a list of those criteria, something like that.
I think that's a good point, and I think that we can, to your point, Ann, in the context of reviewing the franchise agreement for purposes of the Verizon negotiations, we can also, pay close attention to that process that you referenced and discuss what might make sense as far as factors to be considered in an award of the 5G channel. So thank you for that. The next agenda item is updates from the PEG channels themselves. And my understanding is that Molly Gallagher had invited representatives of the channels to appear this evening to provide updates. And it does not appear that any of the representatives are present. So I think we will move on to agenda item number 5. And that is and this sort of derives from the wireless facilities ordinance.
Brian, before we move on to that, if you don't mind, if we could get it on the docket for October. I have questions about the PEG channels, particularly Radnor Studio 21. And I would like I would like those questions. I have questions for regarding some of the important things about Radnor Studio 20. If you want me to be specific about it, I can be here. If not, I can save it.
I think that as far as, I mean, it might be best to save those questions at this point, since we don't have any representatives on hand to respond to whatever those questions are. And, you know, I think given your concerns and your interest in raising those questions to those representatives, I think we can make a concerted effort to have those representatives appear, give them as much advance notice as possible to appear at next month's meeting, where they can be questioned directly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the next agenda item is number 5, the Township Communications and a possible role deriving from the wireless ordinance, and specifically the sort of notion that had been discussed of preparing a flyer regarding the wireless facilities. And I'm going to turn that over to Suzette Margolis to give her thoughts on what was anticipated or what is anticipated there.
Thank you. Yes, since 5G is new technology to everyone, our council role is being defined and figured out at this stage as far as what we're reporting to the commissioners versus the planning commission, et cetera. We were talking at our last meeting about the fact that residents might have a lot of questions regarding 5G and what is all of this, whether it be, not knowing any information about health concerns or the equipment and the physical changes that might happen in the township. So we're proposing that we be involved in some manner with an FAQ sheet or a one-pager informational page to just inform residents and others about what it is and what it's not, and why it's important safety-wise, for EMT and rescue, why it's important not to have blank spots or anything like that in our township,
Coverage
and what we're
holes.
doing to try to avoid all of that.
I think that's a good point. I mean, as we had discussed it, and if I recall correctly, this sort of notion or idea emanated with you from conversations or questions that were put to you by township residents.
Exactly. I think that when you open the conversation, there is a lot of concern. It's new. The last agreement we had with Comcast was 2017, and this wasn't even it wasn't invented yet. So now we're rolling into agreements with different providers again, and I think it would be very beneficial to have some clarification in a basic way, in a push strategy, just an FAQ or one pager that we could provide some input for people who might have concerns.
Any other council members have any comment with respect to the preparation of such a flyer? All right, hearing none, I agree with that recommendation. I think that's something we should work on, and we can have a fuller discussion of at the next council meeting in October. All right, the next agenda item, number 6, is the implications that have been brought to the council's attention by way of a Philadelphia Inquirer article about the implications of a conflict between an existing Pennsylvania state law that was passed in 2004 and the more recent federal broadband spending mandates. And so Council Member Ann Minikazi is going to address, and she's the one who brought it to the council's attention, she's going to address that issue and provide some additional information with respect to the implications of this.
Thank you. This article was in the Philadelphia Inquirer on June 6, 2022, and it is titled, Pennsylvania Law Could Set Back Internet, Money is Available to Update Broadband Access, but a provision from 20 years ago could complicate that. And it's a lengthy article that was in the Inquirer. But in a nutshell, in 2004, Pennsylvania lawmakers gave telephone companies, so I'm reading a bit of a quote here, gave telephone companies what one critic at the time described as a virtual veto, a right of first refusal. In other words, if Radnor Township wanted to form its own public network, we would first have to go to the telephone companies, and they would have a right of first refusal to let us do that or not. And I don't know if this is an issue, but it's something that is in front of the Pennsylvania Utilities Commission, at least as of June 6th. So it's something that we need to be aware of. And I don't know if it's limited just to a municipality in Pennsylvania wanting to create its own public network, or if a community in Radnor Township wanted to have its own kind of network. So what are the limits of that as it stands right now? And then as all this federal money will be coming into states to expand internet access and many other things that were in that bill, will we be able to get that money in Pennsylvania and have access to it as a township, and then in those other kind of entities that might be formed in the township? Question mark. So this is something that I think it's something I wanted to make sure it was set out in front of us so we could be aware, our township solicitor could be aware, the commissioners could be aware, and what do we need to watch for, educate ourselves about in terms of what's happening with this issue.
And do you think that Radnor Township has a real interest in a television station like that?
It would be some kind of a public network, and I don't know. That's another question. You know, would it really impact us? But another township in Pennsylvania was setting up its own and then was stopped. So then they're in litigation. So we don't want that.
I know the article does detail, I mean, it does appear to be mostly a municipality issue, although the article does detail, I guess there are two instances, one where a group of municipalities formed a nonprofit in an attempt to circumvent the law, and I guess succeeded, and then another group of municipalities tried the same approach subsequently, and the carriers in the area wouldn't agree to let them develop their own network, and litigation ensued, to Ann's point, and sounds like they've spent multiple times the amount of money in litigation that they did in installing the network.
I would think Comcast and Verizon would welcome that to get out of their contracts with us and let the feds pay for it.
I think it depends. I mean, I'm not sure. I think it depends on what, I mean, you may well be right, John. I think you have more knowledge with respect to the specifics of the stations and whatnot, but I mean, the use that sort of popped up in my mind was in some of these areas where we do have coverage holes, and for emergency communications purposes, whether those might qualify as areas where the township might want to set up some kind of wireless facility and you know, basically license access to it, and whether the carriers in that instance would be able to exercise this apparent veto right that they have per the 2004 law. So it is something to be on the radar. I don't think there's any active issue right at the moment, but it is something, I think it's a good point that Ann raises, that something for the township and the solicitor and ourselves to keep in mind going forward, to the extent that circumstances change and there may be a desire on the township's part to set up some kind of network along these lines. So anybody else to make comment? I'm sorry.
Is this just in Pennsylvania, this law?
Yes, it's a Pennsylvania law.
Any other questions or comments on that? All right. Thank you, Ian. All right, moving on, the next agenda item was the Homeowners Association Inverary apparently has interest in establishing its own microcell network. And Commissioner Jake Abel, my understanding, was invited to attend with one of the members of the Homeowner Association. They had hoped to attend back at our August meeting. Unfortunately, we weren't able to conduct that meeting, so we had invited them to attend tonight, and unfortunately, it appears that they are not able to attend. So I'm not sure where, what, if anything's been done with respect to an application or anything on the part of the Homeowners Association. I know per the ordinance, the Design Review Board has to sign off on a facility of this nature. The zoning officer has to be presented an application. That in turn goes to the Planning Commission and to us. And I just don't know whether any of that process has been engaged in at this point, or if this was the intention of this presentation was just purely informational to give us a heads up. But hopefully we can have Commissioner Abel and a representative of the Inverary Homeowners Association appear at the October meeting.
So a question. So how is this different than the previous point? Is this this network here, since it's owned by local residents and not the township, and this doesn't violate the 2004 law?
Yeah, I think that this is purely a facility that's going to be owned by, and used within Inverary for its residents to enhance cell service and internet access. So I don't think it's a situation where, I think that the problem in the other situations was these townships were building township-wide networks that they were then licensing for use by other carriers and so on. And in this instance, it's a very small, narrowly defined area in which they're just looking to enhance it. Inverary is right near the Willows, and the Willows is one of the more notorious coverage holes in the township. So they're looking to find a way to enhance their cell phone reception and their wireless access, and so they're pursuing this microcell network. Now, I don't know, as I said before, I'm not sure where it stands in any kind of process, or if this is purely informational, or if or what. But so there is a distinction there. I think it's something where, I mean, ostensibly, Verizon and Comcast and whomever are offering service in that area, but because of the lack of cell towers and facilities in that area, the service is less than optimal.
So if there are 5G cells, or, I mean, there's a chance that what they're installing, whether it's Verizon or AT&T, would have to adhere to this ordinance, right?
I believe so. Yeah. I mean, I think they would have to comply with at least my understanding of the ordinance. They would have to comply with the ordinance in terms of the application process and so on, I believe. So,
Because most likely it would be a small private network on telephone poles, not a larger macro network on a tall tower.
yeah, correct. It's not. I don't think they're looking to put up any kind of tower or anything. This is strictly a neighborhood,
Right.
development-wide network and using small wireless facilities.
Okay.
Okay, the next agenda item is, something that's been a concern of the council for some time, or at least certain council members, and that is sort of reviewing and refining the council's mission and objectives. As I'd indicated previously, that the council used to have a much more substantive role and active role in negotiations of agreements with utilities and sort of day-to-day involvement in, not really day-to-day, but ongoing involvement with respect to reports from those utilities and, you know, any issues that might arise in the context of the provision of their services. And that went away for some time, and, you know, the ordinance does appear to give us some sort of role going forward with respect to review. There's also been some discussion of the council taking a more active role or some kind of role with respect to public relations or whatnot, or information in terms of assisting the township on that basis. So we thought it would make sense to sort of revisit the existing you know, sort of mission of the council and have some dialogue with respect to what, you know, what we think makes sense as far as our role going forward. And keeping in mind, too, that even though we do have a role in this ordinance, you know, a review role in this ordinance, we don't really know the specifics or the extent of that role at this point in time. So it's, you know, things are a little bit fuzzy as far as what exactly we're going to be doing with respect to that ordinance and so on. But so
I also think, Brian, that the Communications Council should have a more active role in the PEG channels. Essentially, we don't know what's going on for content. We don't know what production is being done. We don't know anything unless we watch it. And I periodically watch things, and I think that we should have a very responsible role in what the PEG channels produce. Just my observation.
Yeah, I had some comments on this agenda item as well, agenda item number 8. I wanted to add to our agenda PEG channels updates, which we did for MLTV Mainline Network, RTSD TV, which is the educational channel, and then also Radnor TV, which is the government channel, because I do see this Citizens Communication Council playing a role in collecting this information from these 3 PEG channels for the commissioners, but also for all the residents to have updates. So in terms of at least that agenda item, having some kind of updates from representatives from the 3 channels on a regular basis, maybe not a monthly basis, maybe a quarterly basis, so that that information and those updates are being provided. And so, you know, speaking to agenda item number 8 then, reviewing and refining the CCC mission and objectives, just a couple of notes from our meeting tonight when we're talking about the wireless facilities ordinance. What process do the commissioners want us to, what role do they want us to play, and what process should we follow when the Planning Commission is being sought for counsel and the Citizens Communication Council is being sought for information, and how would that all work, right? So that's something that needs to be defined. Susie was talking about an educational role, the Citizens Communication Council helping to produce some kind of an informational flyer about the 5G. So question mark, is that an educational role that we should be playing, the CCC? And then in terms of the Citizens Communication Council and its role, the number of members that we have, how do we interact with other boards and commissions, as I was mentioning. Those are a couple of items. What are the expectations of the Board of Commissioners of the Citizens Communication Council? Stating clearly here that this council is definitely in transition, because it used to play much more of an active role, but now the township leadership and the commissioners are seeking outside consultants to help with contracts. So how does the Citizens Communication Council dovetail with that process? So that's one part. But then also, how does the CCC, I'll say that this time, how does the CCC work? Because we're the only board that represents the residents. So what additionally do we bring to the commissioners and the outside consultants that we're gaining their expertise, but what are the residents saying that they would want to communicate to us? If we're not playing that role, there is no direct role. I mean, you could talk directly to your commissioner, but that's not the same thing as coming to the CCC. So in terms of all of those things, and those were just things that came up at our meeting tonight, there is a clearly stated statement online on the township website of the mission of this particular commission and our role and our objectives. But we know that it has to be updated, revised, dovetailed, still representing the residents. So that's why I think we need to have that in front of us, and then we need to work on what that definition should be, what our role should be, but then also do a lot of connecting with others, the commissioners, residents, consultants, the township staff, to really define much more clearly how the CCC should function. So we function efficiently and productively and usefully. There's some great expertise on this board. So.
Well, just to underline what Brian said, that the Communications Council had a more formidable role in the past, as far back as I can remember being on this council. And I think it's important that we regain that, you know, much to what you said. And we should have an involvement in a lot of things, because, you know, we are the liaison for the community.
Any other comment? I agree largely with what you say, Ann, and I think that, you know, I think that our role, I mean, we're lacking necessary information at this point to sort of determine what our real role and function is going to be going forward. We are in transition, but, you know, I look at it optimistically from the standpoint that, you know, in the ordinance we do play a role in review of the applications and whatnot, and you know, our input is being sought with respect to the negotiations of the Verizon franchise agreement. I'm not sure exactly what that looks like ultimately, and so we still need to get more clarity on that, you know, what the specifics are of that role and what we're going to be doing there, and if we're going to have an ongoing role going forward with respect to that agreement and how it's implemented. But I think I agree very much with what you had to say, and I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think that's something that as we do get more information, I think the council collectively need to take a look at the existing mission and objectives that are presently online and refine and update them and you know, supplement them to the extent that we feel is required to fulfill all of these roles that you've discussed, because I think I think we can play a very valuable role for the township and for the residents, both for the residents and for the commissioners. So I hope we have the opportunity to do that. Any other comment or question on that particular agenda item? All right, moving on. Item number 9 is new business. I don't know if any of the council members present have any additional issues or concerns they want to raise at this point. Okay, I don't think we have any new business. And it does not appear we have any members of the public present, so we will not have any public participation at tonight's meeting. So I believe that concludes the agenda for tonight's meeting. I want to thank all of you for coming. It feels good to actually have a meeting, to be having some substantive conversation, and hopefully we'll be able to have more meetings and more substantive conversation and be able to play a more active role that benefits both the residents and the commissioners and the township as a whole. So with that, I think this meeting of the Citizens Communication Council is adjourned. The next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, October 19, 2022 at 6:30 PM right here in the Radnor Shire Room. Meeting adjourned.